Before modern chord symbols and Roman numerals, musicians used something called the figured bass as chord symbols, usually written for the harpsichord or organ player. A figured bass symbol is a bass or bottom note and a set of figures or numbers written below the bass note that spell out the other notes of the chord as intervals above the bass note. Be aware, the bass note does not have to be in the bass clef. The bass is the lowest sounding note. A triad with the root on the bottom can be written as the root note and a 5 and a 3 written below the note, since a fifth and a third above the bass spell the chord that we need, such as C, E, G. Our diatonic triads in a key can be represented by 3 notes on a staff, 3 notes on a keyboard, a Roman numeral, or as a figured bass, a bass note and 2 numbers. Each of the individual notes can still be referred to by a scale degree number and a solfege syllable. You might ask, shouldn't the harpsichord player just know how to make a triad on each note? The answer would be yes, and as long as the root is on the bottom, or in the bass, that is how it worked. They did not bother to write the 5 and the 3. They just wrote the bass note, which was always the root. However, for various reasons, sometimes people wanted the third of the chord or the fifth of the chord to be the lowest sounding note. When you rearrange the notes of a chord, the distances between the notes changes. If the third of the chord is the lowest note, we say the chord is in first inversion. If the third of the chord is in the bass, then the fifth of the chord is a third above the bass, and the root is a sixth above the bass. If the lowest note is the third of the chord, the numbers 6 and 3 signify the other 2 chord members. Remember, the numbers tell us where we find the other notes of the chord by counting up from the lowest note, the bass. We often omit the figure 3 and just use the number 6. We call triads that have the third in the bass 6 chords or 6/3 chords. We might say a 1/6 chord, which would be a tonic chord with the third in the bass. Or we might say a 2/6/3 chord, which would be a supertonic chord with the third in the bass. If we rearrange the notes of our chord so that the fifth is on the bottom, or in the bass, then we need numbers to point up to the root and third of the chord. In this case, the figures are 6, 4. The 4 points to the root of the chord, and the 6 points to the third of the chord. There is no shorthand for the figures of second inversion triads. This may be starting to seem complicated, but let's take a minute to break it down. You are always in a key of only 7 notes, so there are only 7 possible triads. Each triad can be rearranged so that any of the 3 notes can be on the bottom or in the bass. There are only 21 possible Roman numeral figured bass combinations, not a particularly long list. If you are starting to feel challenged, spend some time working in major keys only before you move on to diatonic triads in minor keys.